Okie dokie. Welcome everyone to February 3rd EU edition Flux, EU and UK and the Brexit land edition of the Flux Dev meeting. I think I'm going to do a quick recce for any action items just so we can review any of those. And then Stefan's put something on the agenda, so we can talk about that in a sec.
Yeah, I want to discuss a little the feature parity roadmap. So currently we have a dedicated project in the Flux org for tracking the image automation features, how they are going to reach beta. We recently released the image reflector controller, which now has support for self-signed and custom TLS certificates when talking to image registries. And yeah, I don't think we should add the Git stuff here to the image controller beta project, or I don't know, should we create a new project to track feature parity and I don't know, link to this project from that one? In
the beta release project.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Are we going to make the image controllers beta release project a requirement for feature parity? I think yes, but that's not the only requirement. That's why I was thinking, should we create a new project or?
Yeah, there's stuff I want to be in the beta that I don't think is required for parity. So yeah, basically one of those options, either restrict that one to only things for parity and then make a new one, or have separate ideas of what's needed for parity and the beta. I'm inclined towards that latter one, i.e. just keep the idea of parity and beta release as separate things and leave the board as it is, and add things without regard for what's needed for parity necessarily, and then just go by the roadmap for the actual parity. Because I don't think there are that many things that need to be kept track of for parity now, that I'm aware of anyway. I think it's just the migration guide.
Yeah, we don't have here in the roadmap a feature that I realized recently that's quite a blocker for many Flux V2 users, is the fact that we don't support specifying TLS cert when talking to a Git server. We do have now this for an image registry, but not Git. And in my mind, besides what's here in the roadmap, like writing the guide and so on, I think that's the only blocker for us to start to have like everything here at 100%. Since we already stated Flux read-only feature parity, so 100%.
Yeah. How do you row that back?
Yeah, roll back to 99% and add.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we could say, I mean, that sort of thing is on very borderline. Is it a little bit too small to be mentioning on a roadmap?
Yeah.
But what we could do is kind of say, headline stuff where 100%, but see this project for issues, and then have a project which is, again, the whole Flux org, but it's not just the image stuff, it's everything.
Yeah.
On which there'll be like 2 issues, and then anything else we think of.
Yeah,
so the whole, but I started working yesterday on implementing the whole self-signed cert stuff for Git, at least for libgit 2, and whatever we do for GoGit, if someone wants to solve them in the future, it's kind of a different thing. And it shouldn't take too long, because when I implemented the libgit 2 provider or solution, we also implemented the self-signed cert test, because we weren't sure if the libgit 2 is actually using the host CA. So it's just adding it, like everything is set up there. It's just basically copying what the image automation controller is doing today. So that we don't have two different solutions, basically.
Mm.
So the image reflector controller, what it's doing is injecting the TLS certs into the HTTP client, because we have access to the underlying HTTP client and we can override it. That's how Michael wrote the implementation. I don't know if we have access to the HTTP client in in libgit 2, but I think we have a hook where we can just write the validation using the Go standard TLS lib. So it's quite different in a way.
Yeah, the only thing I made sure there is that the secret format is the same. So that it's like cert secret or whatever it's called, and that we're not changing the way that you're passing CAs, because that would be weird. Going, oh, if you're using source controller, this is how your CA secret should look like, and if you're using the other thing, this is how it should look. So in the hooks we get the X509 data, so it's just basically verifying it against the CA. Yeah,
so we standardized around the name of the keys that should go in the secret, and we chose the Helm standard for that. So it's key file, CA file, and cert file. We use that for Helm repositories. We use that for image repositories, and we should also use it for Git repo. So and once we have that in source controller, then we can add the TLS flags to Flux create secret Git. And warn the user, hey, you should switch the implementation to libgit 2 if you want to do that. Also, source controller should error out issue events if you have go git and then you specify cert files inside the secret, because they are incompetent. They are not going to work. And for version 001 of TLS support, I think that's fine. We don't have to find a workaround for go git right now. We just have to provide a way for users to set up certs in some way. Sounds good to you, Philip?
Yeah, no, that's kind of what my thinking also. So as long as everyone else is fine with it, at least it's something. At least we're not just blocking everybody from not being able to move forward.
Yeah. Is there any way to do the equivalent of kind of cherooting the HTTP client, or giving environment variables so it looks in the place that you've set up for the files? Just occurred to me, because it uses the default client, but maybe the default client comes with no settings, so it probably just looks in standard places for certificates and so on.
So we don't touch the disk. The disk is read-only inside all controllers. We load.
Right, but if you say wrote them to temp and then set an environment variable to say SSL or TLS certs come from here. I have no idea whether this is actually possible, but it's sometimes a sort of thing that you can do.
For what? For GoGit? Or?
For GoGit, and if it's a standard environment variable, it might work for libgit 2 as well. Or give it a SSL conf or something like that refers to them. I know you can do that with SSH, similar sort of thing. That's what Flux v1 does. Just creates an SSH conf.
I think the problem is that you need an SSH conf or an HTTPS conf per host, and the client for GoGit is shared. So you need something that dynamically loads your config based on the host you receive. And then use that only for that request, and then go on to the next request and fetch the credentials for that certificate for that host.
Yeah, what I'm wondering is whether the default client will. Oh, it caches connections. Okay, so probably not.
Yeah, it's basically
that's going to kill that anyway.
GoGit is designed to work based on doing one thing against one host, and then it assumes it loses all configurations, and then it does the next thing.
Yeah, that's annoying. Okay, never mind. Probably won't work. Okay.
So let's say we ship Philip's notification. We get TLS support for Git hosts. Next was proxy support for Git over SSH, and we have a workaround, a working solution using a sidecar, a tunnel sidecar that does that for you. I'm inclined on, I don't know, write some docs around it. Hey, this is how you can do it. If you are using a proxy, you have to write this sidecar and patch the source controller pod so it will route the traffic through the sidecar instead of going straight to GitHub or whatever you are trying to reach.
Is it something that you would do on an admin level rather than a user level? So it's something when you're setting up the source controller, you want all the traffic to go through the proxy.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yes, so it's an admin only setting. You cannot do something in the custom resource. You need to set up, modify.
Right, it's like if you're running it in a sequestered cluster that needs to go through a jump host type arrangement or something. Okay.
Yeah, so I was not sure that we need to do something from our source code to take into account that particular sidecar, but since that when you set the proxy inside the pod, then all requests will go through that sidecar, and you don't have to say localhost or anything like that. You still keep GitHub in your URL, but then it will go through the socat proxy, and it will do its job. So for, I don't know, enterprise users that are behind proxy, everything is behind the proxy in their environments, they'll have to do this. So yet again, it's just about documentation. Write a doc with examples taken from that source controller issue. I can post it, a link to it, 1 second. This is the issue. Yeah, so you need to set the host name of github.com to your proxy IP. That's the thing. And of course, so this is not supported by Flux Bootstrap out of the box. You have to follow the customization guide inside the installation doc. You can create a patch for the source controller deployment, put there the sidecar, set up the host names, and then Bootstrap will reconcile that, will change source controller pod definition, and everything will work as you expected. the issue with this is that you can no longer bootstrap with the CLI directly on GitHub if you have this proxy requirement. You have to follow the manual bootstrap and set.
And you would have to manually apply at least that customization one time.
Yeah. So
seems okay.
Maybe the best place to document this would be in the installation guide, different section. Hey, if you are behind the proxy and you have these hard requirements, this is what you should do.
Yeah, I mean, at least point to it, right? So if because it's quite a specialized thing in some ways. So sort of it's like a recipe. It's a how-to. So it's sort of off the critical path, if you like, or the happy path. So yeah, maybe point to it. Write a separate thing, which can be pretty short, and then point to it.
Or write a separate thing or add it to the customize your installation with a link to, hey, if you have the proxy, take a look here at this how to, if you want to set up things in this way.
Sure. Yeah, I think we'll probably accumulate a bunch of recipes like that, won't we? So worth making room for them, having a standard place to put them. Okay.
Hide, are we going to use MK docs for Flux CD website, or are we going to migrate everything to?
We are not. Wait. Let me see what the website's actually using. There are so many documentation tools these days. The website is using Hugo, so we are moving to Hugo.
Hugo.
Yeah.
But okay, so MK docs cannot be hosted with Hugo, or
the new website, or the main website was set up using Hugo, and I've been expanding that, and it doesn't make sense to have a make docs and a Hugo website running on the same domain. So the new website is powered by Hugo, but template or file or documentation wise, nothing really changed. It has the support for the same markdown, formatting, etc., etc.
Okay, great.
One thing that may change is how the nodes are defined, but it's special syntax anyway, so that would just mean replacing those. But other than that, all should basically render fine.
Yeah, so before the move, we should discuss how to reorganize the guides. So like Michael said, now most of things are under guides. And I proposed, I don't know, some time ago to move the migration out of guides because it's something that, we have a bunch of V1 users. We should make that more visible in the docs, at least for 1 year. So
I think that could already be done now, or at least highlight or make it more visible by just moving the migration menu out of the guides menu. I mean, it's a file-based menu anyway. So the directory structure we have for the documentation, the cell doesn't really matter. We can just put those items higher up on the list.
Yeah, the problem is with URLs, right? Because, for example, Flux V1 migration is now, the URL is guides/Flux V1 migration.
Oh, but that doesn't matter because we can just create a new menu item and link to the old URL, but then it's more visible to the user scanning through the menu, but the URL structure stays the same.
Okay.
That's one solution.
Yeah, another thing that I want to discuss is installation. So it's getting bigger and bigger as a one-page thing. We are going to add here, I don't know, we have to create here a dedicated thing for Azure because you cannot link to it. I've created a box for Azure DevOps, but when people say, hey, Flux Bootstrap doesn't work on Azure DevOps because they didn't get to this panel, I cannot directly link to it because it's not a title. If I make it a title, then it breaks the generic server doc.
But it makes sense to create like this. What I've seen on some documentation websites is like if they have things that works with specific cloud providers or has a specific installation instructions for cloud providers or other things, that they have this kind of tab interface where you can pressure the tab with your cloud provider, and then it pops out the installation instructions for just your cloud providers, for example, Google Cloud Services or whatever. That would still give you one page and people won't have to search, but provide people the information for just what they are trying to do. I think there is a tab extension somewhere for Hugo and MakeDocs we're using right now.
Yeah, but that hides the information even more. If we put tabs with, let's say, GKE, EKS, AKS, whatever, then it's almost impossible to link to it because an item in the tab is not something that will have a direct link to it. And even if you have a direct link, it will not switch to that tab. You'll see the default. Or
depends on how much
JavaScript
how much
you throw at it.
Yeah, you can always chuck some JavaScript in.
Can you just put an anchor with an ID and no text?
Yeah, but then to activate the anchor basically and have the browser switch to the tab with your information, which still needs to require some JavaScript. But
I mean without the tab.
Yeah, but then you have this lengthy page, and I think the problem people often first scan a page and see how much information they have to consume, and then they go either ahead consuming it, or they're like, oh, I'm going to nope the hell out of here. So having a shorter looking page at least will motivate people more.
Did you have an example of some projects that did this?
I can look them up. I don't have them by hand right now, but I know Rancher has it for offline installations. That's where I noticed it the other day. You get the Rancher upgrades.
So for Flagger, I opted to create a generic install doc that's very light, should work on any Kubernetes, but then I've created dedicated install docs for, let's say, GKE with Istio, EKS with AppMesh, and now it's one with a pull request for Alibaba Cloud.
If you go to, for example, if you scroll through that page and go to like C upgrade Rancher, at the bottom of the page, you see like the air gap upgrade and the upgrade thing. And they even use these slider elements for option A and option B to even further shorten the page by hiding information.
Yeah, but you cannot link to Kubernetes air gap upgrades. It's impossible to link to it.
I don't know. Let's see what they have added.
The URL doesn't change when you click on it, so.
No, they have a ref specified, but it doesn't have an ID.
That's one of the I'm having with GKE docs because they do the same stuff.
It isn't kind of also an issue. It's like it's a two-parted or it's like a multi-matrix solution, because it's like you could, in theory, could be users who are running Azure DevOps with EKS or Azure with GitHub. So it's like the combination of, okay, so what cloud provider are you running? And then what Git provider are you using? So it becomes like, you can't really do this is the Azure explanation, because I'm guessing there are a lot of users who are running Azure, but with GitLab or something else.
GitHub, yeah.
Yeah.
Damn.
But it's a very important topic, because we are seeing a lot of questions of just like things that are documented, and either it's not obvious or people aren't spending the time to search.
You to kind of choose your own adventure style thing. I don't know if you're familiar with those books. They're the ones that have some paragraphs, and at the bottom is, if you want to host on Azure, turn to page 83. If you want to host on GCP, turn to, you need that. But with kind of some path dependence. So when you get to that and you're done with that section, the next thing is now go back to where you were and continue.
Yeah.
It's tricky. It's really hard to deal with all these permutations. The way web pages work just isn't quite up to it. Yeah. We need Xanadu.
I do think there is value in creating 3 dedicated guides for the top 3 cloud providers. But then from there, reference to, hey, if you use a different Git provider than the one that this cloud comes with, take a look at the generic documentation where.
Yeah, it's maybe more acceptable simply because that means that if you're kind of transcoding stuff, so each of those guides can be just a page you read down if you're a user, right? And they may have common sections, but the point is that dealing with the common sections is our problem and not the user's problem. And that is a better situation than making the people jump through hoops, because it's, you see what I mean? At least it means that we are in control of that problem.
Yep.
Of having the common bits, rather than putting that problem onto the user to find the right relevant documentation.
Yeah, with Swagger, I've run into many issues until I got to this doc structure. People were going to how it works, where it explains everything. Oh, if you use this, if you use that, if you use that, and no one managed to configure it for their own use case. Hey, I'm using GKE and Istio, or I'm using ECAS with AppMesh and stuff like that. After I've created dedicated guides for and bundle and coupling they're not guides, they are more about tutorials, like how to run it on EKS with AppMesh. Then all of a sudden, all the, misunderstood questions around it, like drop to 10% or even less. Makes the documentation more verbose because you will repeat the same information all over the place. Like if you look at Flagger docs, all the tutorials here basically have like the same stuff. You deploy the app, then you patch the app, then you do that, and you do that. But the cloud specific or the API specific things are what really matters. And it keeps the user focused on a single page that addresses their use case.
Well, there isn't any way to do like a partial include, so you can not have to have that text repeated in the body of the repo.
Who's the question aimed at me? Well, I can think of ways, but not as bad. I wouldn't do it. Way. No, what you're looking for is more like this. You have this note-taking app these days, which use like a GraphDB, right? Which automatically links common sections together based on the fact that they have common keywords in or something. That's more like, I don't know if you're familiar with roamresearch.com. That's the thing you're almost looking for. But no, the thing I'm worried about, Stefan, is that like by having all these pieces of information, which are basically duplicates of each other, woven into your documentation, doesn't it result in outdated documentation all over the place because things aren't updated at the same time, or you lose track of what's included in the documentation. So once you make a change to the application, you are not sure where you need to reflect those changes back in the documentation? Or is that automatically resolved by people following the tutorials and running into issues and solving it themselves and then submitting a PR?
That's how usually works for Flagger, yes. I forgot to change something and hey, the tutorial doesn't work. Fix it.
More along the lines of how partials are used in Rails, where you have a document that's the short section. There's nothing like that for MP docs, then, is what I gather.
There are partials, but those partials are more used to inject common style elements. For example, a YouTube thumbnail or some notification block, or basically it's more about styling than about content. There is an expectation that all the content for a page is on the Markdown document itself, or that you have this overlay template which collects or gathers various Markdown files and then renders them together into one. But it's not possible to take a tiny bit and put it into a page.
Got it. I think I understand why.
Yeah, me too. But
should we let that one brew in our minds for a while and move on in the agenda? Make sure we cover other stuff. I think there's at least one more thing.
Hello, Tom, by the way. You just joined?
Yes, hello, Tom.
Hey, guys.
Is there something you would like to put on the agenda? Or you're happy
actually,
to...
you already had the custom TLS certs that we ran into an issue the other day. So I'm glad you guys are already working on that. So that's exciting.
Okay, cool. Okay, so moving on in the agenda.
Maybe one other thing, like a read-only Bootstrap version, so that you can use the easy Bootstrap command, but not need a write token for, we use GitLab, but right now it errors out if you don't have the token there.
Okay, interesting.
Wait a second. So that's Flux install if you just want the manifest. How would the read-only Bootstrap work? Bootstrap creates a repo, adds deploy keys, pushes files, pushes.
Yeah. So the pushes files, sometimes we have an environment where we want to share a common deployment with a fixed Flux configuration. So we want to use the single command to share how everybody installs. And it wasn't quite as simple with the install, I didn't think, but that could be my lack. We're still running 04, so we have not updated. We have a container hardening process that we need to go through, which is sometimes cumbersome. So we're going to wait for this MR that just got into source controller. So when that release comes out, we're going to go through the whole process again and update some of our process flows. I wasn't sure if that read-only mode came in.
Yeah, I mean,
the scope to do a better job explaining what the difference between Bootstrap and install is, and that, you know, that's why, because an install is basically do all the same stuff, but don't do the Git bits for you. You get to do them, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, but that may not be super obvious from the docs.
Yeah, so
sorry, Stefan, I jumped in.
Tom, I pasted the link to a section in the docs where here you can see how Flux install can be used to replicate the Bootstrap, but everything else in terms of creating the repo, setting up deploy keys, maybe sharing the components YAML between clusters, everything like that is in your power. It's up to you what you want to do with it. You just use the command to generate the necessary YAMLs, and from there it's all custom. So
right. So we wanted to have the install of Flux also be declarative as well. So the Bootstrap that we create for one of our clusters writes the explicit Flux configurations, images, pull secrets, etc., to the repo. But then someone else wants to debug an issue, so they want to replicate, you know, what that environment looks like. So we'd like to be able to a little more easily just point them at, you know, here's that repo, go bootstrap it, go install it. A little more back and forth with it seems like the way that we're doing here.
How would
and
so,
I guess go ahead. Sorry, Stefan.
the underlying issue is the fact that there is a file called sync, which contains a Git repository definition and a customization definition that applies the Flux manifests, so Flux can upgrade itself. Now, the thing is, you cannot reuse the Git repository object on a different cluster unless you copy the SSH secret. If you generate a new SSH secret, which I think you should do, then you have to go back to the original repo and add that deploy key again. You shouldn't be, I don't think you should be reusing SSH secrets between clusters, but if you want to do that as a test, you need to copy the secret from the original cluster, otherwise to not be able to clone it.
Right, but if you're read-only, you don't really need a deploy key.
Of course, the deploy key is read-only, gives you read-only access to the cluster. The deploy key we set with Bootstrap is not write. It doesn't allow write operations. So with Git, you cannot clone something over SSH if you don't have a deploy key set up on the repo. What you can do with Git is using Git over HTTPS, and that works for public repos. It's not SSH, it will just go over HTTPS and fetch that if it's public.
So we're doing public repos. So we don't need a deploy key necessarily to read the repo.
Okay, now I understand your issue. So you are saying, hey, Bootstrap requires me asks for a token, but we want to Bootstrap without a token because our repo is public. That's
yeah, and I probably didn't do a very good job of explaining one of the use cases was really, so we're developing a set of co-configured applications that we're trying to deploy all together and kind of demonstrate what it looks like, but getting someone set up in that environment sometimes takes a little bit of time. So we like to more easily give them like a hello world, like here, go run this one command with your Flux CLI, and then your Kubernetes cluster will have everything you need. Right now that process is a little bit more involved, and there's some other subtleties about trying to provide image pull secrets for all of our images, which are not just read-only. You need so the repos read-only, but not the containers. So we're working through that, but it would be great to just have like a single Flux call that I can just like point at a repo and say like, there you go.
Yeah, for public repos, that should be possible. So let's say you create a cluster. Yeah, so you create a cluster for testing. You run a command, kind or whatever you are using. You have a cluster. Then you just run Flux install on that cluster. Then you say Flux create source Git for your public Git repo. And then you say Flux create customization for a directory in that repo, and boom, you have everything. Right? You don't need SSH keys, you don't need anything else. So for demos, just Flux install and Flux create commands that are acting directly on that cluster. No Bootstrap involved, no Git repo involved, besides the one that you want to demo. So okay. That's how we should.
Great. So we'll just break it up into those 3 calls instead for the Flux install, the Git creation, and then the customization and creation.
Yeah.
Copy. Great. Thank you.
We simplified the get started guide, and it shows exactly that. So the get started guide shows you Bootstrap, then add the repo, add the customization. Instead of Bootstrap, you'll just do Flux install, then add the source and create the customization without exporting them. Just run them on the cluster, it will happen instantly.
Thank you.
I think we should create a cheat sheet or something for Flux CLI for easy demos, and I just want to try this out. Yeah, maybe we should do that.
Yeah, it's another recipe, isn't it? If it's not just purely built into the CLI, then it'd be good to have a little how-to, which is, here is how to just run a public Git repo from scratch. or
Because
something.
the bootstrap was like so simple to get set up, but it needed that write permission, so that user experience was very nice. When I made an issue, like I think we talked about it in Slack the other day, Stefan, and I was like, oh, like here's the base YAML and then like bootstrap and then I'm done. Like that was great. Like I really enjoyed that, and I was hoping that same experience for someone who just needed read only.
Yeah, we should have how-tos besides guides, and write down this kind of, the Kubernetes documentation has a kubectl cheat sheet where it shows you, hey, if you want to do some things, here are some commands. Maybe we could build a Flux CLI cheat sheet for, hey, if you just run public repo, this is how you do it for testing, with no persistence, with no bootstrap, no nothing.
Yeah, some of those things are probably in the usage examples, but the thing is you have to know where to look for them before you can find them. So yeah, I agree. Surfacing that stuff is worthwhile.
Yeah, I can take a follow-up on this and start how-to guide for public repos with no bootstrap. And I'm guessing we'll have more over time. But
yeah, I think it'll naturally come up.
Yeah, I mean, Tom, you're not the first person who asks that. I've seen this question on Slack a couple of times. So FAQ is not a good place because, FAQ is something else. This is how to cheat sheet or whatever. So I'll do that.
Kingdon, did you have an agendum in here, or was I imagining that right at the start?
I didn't add one. I wrote down what Stefan said about the recap for the feature parity.
Okay, I thought that, I just vaguely recall there being two right at the top of the meeting. That's cool.
I meant to mention that I'm going through issues now after having completed my pull request review for Flux v1. And there's a question about chart release for the latest Flux v1 image. Should we do just a quick chart bump before, so that if you do Flux Helm install Flux, you get the latest image? Because right now you get 1.21.0. There are other chart changes that I wanted to include, but I thought maybe it would make sense to just do image only change release, if that's straightforward and doesn't require too much effort.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward if I remember.
Yeah, you only need to push a tag.
You need to tag with chart -something.
Chart minus the next chart version. So yeah, we need a pull request before to bump the chart version.
Do we normally put changelog entries in for that into the chart?
Yes,
directory though as well.
Yeah.
So it needs a small PR to update the changelog, which if it's just a version change, that's pretty easy. But
the chart version needs a bump too. In the charts file.
Yeah. Yes, there's like app version and the chart version itself. So those need to change. But it's all described, right? There's a document in the docs internal releasing, I think. There's a section on releasing the Helm chart.
And there will be other examples from history that I can follow.
Yep. And yes, we will often do one when there's or usually do one when there's a new version of the daemon. Yeah.
So Kingdon, I will paste here the link to the release doc.
Thank you.
And if you want to open a pull request, I'll review it We just, hey, bump Flux version, link to the pull request that Michael did that actually bump the container image version. Then you have to bump the chart version as well and make a pull request with those two. And after the merge, I will make sure to create the chart tag so it gets published.
Okay, I put that in the notes as well.
Oh, thank you.
Also, in terms of future parity things, we don't have documentation on Azure usage for KMS and for image registry. Lee is working on them. For KMS, I thought it's impossible to use it. Well, someone figured out how it actually works, and we have now an issue in Flux 2 with, hey, there is a SOPs bug. They don't look at environment variables, they look at the Azure CLI on disk. And of course, we have no Azure CLI in any of our controllers. But if you set an environment variable, hey, don't look for the Azure CLI, use the environment variables that Azure pod identity already sets up, then KMS, it will work. So you can use SOPs with Azure KMS. So
that bug is in every single tool that does Azure authentication, because even Terraform has these issues because there is no one tool, because there's so many different ways of authenticating. There's like environment variables, service principal,
I've seen there are
MSI,
5. MSI, whatever.
And there's no like library from Azure that they can just basically go, just give me whatever is the best. Just follow the order. So like I know we've added this support for like Packer, like even Packer didn't have support for MSI for a very long time. So it's like, yeah.
So SOAPs has support, works great, but the problem with SOAPs is it tries the CLI, doesn't find it, and it doesn't try all the other options that they wrote in SOAPs. So that's why I said I think it's a SOAPs bug that it doesn't try all the variants of authentication and bails out if the CLI is not there. But you can force it to not look at the CLI and just try MSI, which actually works. So it's yet again an issue of having documentation than something that's missing from our implementation. And with the container registry, AKS is basically the same stuff. It's not that image reflector controller is not able to connect to Azure container registry. Is the fact that we don't have the right docs in place. So I don't know, should we block the feature parity things on these issues that are about docs, or move forward and we get them when we get them? That's my question.
I don't think it should be a blocking thing. It's something that is an ongoing work to make sure that the docs kind of reflects reality.
Also, the solution of how to work with Azure is there in these issues. It's not like we have no solution. It's not properly documented in the Flux docs. That's the issue, basically.
I'm more worried about the work that he's doing with multi-tenancy Azure authentication, because I've been reading through the source code for AD pod identity again, and I don't think it's going to work, because it looks at the source IP of the pod to determine if it's authenticated, which in turn introduces its own security complexities in Kubernetes, which I've had some discussions with Microsoft about. But you can't really then export a token in the same way you can do in AWS that then can be passing around to other pods. I don't think it's going to be possible, because it's doing a bunch of lookups against the Kubernetes API to determine where the request is coming from.
So you are saying that when the image reflector controller goes to the container registry to get the tags, it cannot use the secret that some other pod is creating for AKS, because the HTTP request will not be authorized, even if it has the right secret, right? That's what you're saying.
Well,
because it doesn't come from the right pod.
Yeah, and I don't even think it gives you the secret in turn. It's a kind of the way. It's not the same way that what's called the whole AWS IRSA works. It's more of how like Kube2IM used to work with like modifying IT tables on the nodes and then intercepting traffic and then injecting credentials. So what's basically happening is it's doing MSI on your behalf, but then it's also going and looking, because it works by label. So it will look at like, okay, so where is this traffic coming from? Okay, let me go get that pod and look at the label on the pod to make sure that it's matching the Azure Identity label selector.
How
and
is
then,
this? Yeah.
But this creates like really fun stuff where if you're running AAD pod identity and you're able to do host networking, you can basically assume any MSI role in the cluster.
But
because you can basically, yeah, and I've talked to Microsoft about this, and they're like, it's not a bug, it's a feature. So I don't know. It's one of those things that really annoys me right now. At least we have to figure something out, and we should talk about Microsoft about this, because it's like, if it works for Amazon and it works for GKE, we need to come up with a way, because we can't do service principal client secrets. It's like they live forever, and you never know where they end up. And so right now, within the setups I do, I refuse to allow people to generate client secrets and then pass them around. So it's like we have to do MSI, and we have to figure out how to do this in a multi-tenant setup.
Yeah, so the multi-tenancy proposal that Lee has set up has no consideration around IAM roles. It's not in the scope. We cannot figure IAM roles as, it's super specific, right? Google does it in a way, Amazon does it in a way, Azure does it in a way, I don't know. DigitalOcean probably does it in some way, and so on. If we are going to say, hey, we don't ship the multi-tenancy features until we have sorted out all these IAM role problems, we'll never sort them out, because there will always be some cloud out there that doesn't work like we assume. So I added a note about, hey, what are we going to do with IAM roles? But I don't think we should block on them. As for Flux V1 feature parity, I also don't think we should block on not having Azure docs about, pull secrets. It feels very strange to other users that are not on Azure to say, hey, we don't use Flux to use that feature parity, but to them it doesn't really matter because they don't use Azure. So I don't think it's fair to block on that. On the other hand, we shouldn't ignore Azure users and try our best to come up with good documentation for that and explain the downsides, because, well, like with source controller, there is a downside. If you use Azure DevOps, then you don't have shallow clones and so on. So you should make that obvious in our docs and move on. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, I can try that stuff. I'm not running the whole those types of things, so it's more of, if I have free time to do that, that's something I can do for my normal work. I think the most important thing is setting up a framework which makes it easy for users to contribute to documentation. Say, I solved image pull secrets for ATR. Okay, good, go document it here, so that we don't have to go around trying to document everyone's use case.
Yeah.
Okay, it is past 11 now. So let's draw a line under this edition of Flux Dev meeting. and make a resolution to be here again next week at a completely different time and day, if we can, or in 2 weeks at the same time and day. Thanks, everyone. Nice to welcome Tom along today. Hopefully we'll see you again.
Absolutely.
And thanks, Kingdon, for taking notes diligently as well. Great job. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Great.
See you all.
Thank you.
Bye.